Morning, Andrew. Thanks for joining us on Business Owner Spotlight. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know a bit about what you do.
Yeah, sure. I'm the chief executive for Fly Atlantic, which is new airline which plans to start operations from Belfast in summer of 2024, flying primarily to North America, but also to Europe from Belfast, and developing Belfast into a major aviation hub.
Fantastic. And how have you? I'm picking up from the accent, Andrew. You're not native to Belfast. How did you wash up in Belfast then?
Yeah, very astute, Scott, to pick that up. No, I go back a little bit before I got involved with this project. In fact, 2 or 3 projects ago, I was working in Iceland with a company called WOW Air, which some people will have heard of. And we were looking at WOW Air. We had a model of flying passengers across the Atlantic through Iceland. We were looking to find a new base for WOW to supplement what was going on in Iceland. And although I've been to Northern Ireland a few times previously, that was the reason for engaging with Belfast Airport. And we spent some time looking at Belfast International as a potential second hub for WOW Air. But in terms of this project, we actually looked at, I don't know, it's about 10, 12, 13 airports in the UK and Ireland to evaluate which work best for our business model. And Belfast came top of the list in terms of its operational capabilities, but also in terms of the commercial deal that was offered to us. And there were other factors as well, the catchment area, the relative lack of connections across the Atlantic, the ability to grow into space there. So a number of factors, but I guess, it was a selection process, and Belfast scored comfortably at the top of that table.
So essentially, you've removed any emotion from that decision, and it's just been down to figures, facts and figures, and the best fit for your business model.
No, I don't. That's probably a little unfair, Scott. I think I like the idea of building the airline in Northern Ireland and Belfast, because I think this part of the UK has had a rough time in terms of economics and political problems, social problems, etc. So I think that the project can be really transformational in Belfast in a way it couldn't be if it was situated in, let's say, Stansted Airport or Southampton or Birmingham or something like that. So I think there's a kind of social dimension to this as well, and that certainly made it a happy choice, if you like. The economics came together with the sentiment.
Excellent, that's brilliant. So it's an absolute no-brainer then. And what about how come now is the right time? What's made you take the leap now?
I think it is the right time, and there are a couple of reasons behind that. First of all, when the pandemic came along, it really disrupted North Atlantic air travel, and it changed some of the rules of the game. What it did was it allowed us to look at, to take one example, bringing in aircraft at prices which are much lower than the prices which applied pre-pandemic. But the other factor is, why look at 24 and not at 2022, for example, or 23? We've seen some numbers in the last few days which show that, although the market across the North Atlantic has rebounded very strongly after the pandemic, it's still some way below the pre-pandemic levels. We would expect by 2025 it will be back to where it was pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. So I think our timing, summer 24, hits a sweet spot, and that we're coming back into the market at a time when cost inputs are relatively depressed, but there is strength and growth in that market going into 25, 26, 27, 28, and so on. So from my perspective, it wasn't as carefully calculated as I'm putting it now, but it's certainly worked out well, and summer 24 looks like a great moment to get into the North Atlantic air travel market.
It's triggering in me that you've used maybe a choppy economic situation and used it to your advantage. Not by design, but instead of carring away from it, you've actually looked at an opportunity.
Well, as I say, it wasn't pure calculation. Some of it has fallen onto me. I was working on restructuring an airline in Cyprus when COVID struck, and we had a real problem. We were going very well with the restructuring exercise, and thankfully that airline is now doing very well. But we had a period of about 9 months when there was no air travel whatsoever in or out of Cyprus. That was a major issue, and it obviously threw a hand grenade into the process. And so at that time, I was sort of forced to examine other business ideas and other concepts. And during lockdown, I returned to England and started kicking new ideas around and looking at business opportunities. So some of this is just serendipity. It just the timing has just worked out this way. But crisis leads to opportunity. I think that's an old Chinese maxim. I spent 25 years in Hong Kong. So I'm very much, saturated with that kind of philosophy. Crisis leads to opportunity.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And obviously, this project is quite in its infancy. But you've been a business leader and around business for a long time. So I'm keen to understand what would you say has been the biggest learning you've had as a business owner or a business leader?
I think a lot of it is around the management of the team. I mean, that's the most fascinating aspect of running a business. I think I think it's analogous to being a football manager. Frankly, it's fitting the right individuals and the right tactics into the right place on the pitch. And I think there are many specific lessons which apply to the airline industry and airline startups in particular. But I think management of people, being straightforward, being transparent. Not dodging confrontation when confrontation is necessary to get issues out there and clear the air. I think those are the principal lessons I've learned, and I think they have a universal application. They're not just true of the airline industry. If you look at the airline sector, there's a very tough challenge when you start up an airline, and this would be my fourth or fifth startup, depending how you define an airline startup. The tricky part about this is that aircraft have a long lead time prior to delivery. Licensing takes at least 1 year and can take 18 months. And all through that process, you've got to manage costs and people very, very carefully, because it's very easy to build a huge team at the outset, cover all the bases, and then have lots of people sitting around twiddling their thumbs without very much to do. And obviously you burn through cash very quickly. So the skill in this exercise is having enough people to manage the process, enough people on the site to do what's required to get a license and get regulatory approval, whilst not overloading the team and using all your cash long before you've got onto the runway. That is an exercise which I've learned through the various startups to refine, and I think I feel confident that Fly Atlantic, we're going to get that aspect of it right.
So that's really interesting to me, because I totally agree that's really universal, albeit on a much smaller scale. I would see that with a lot of business owners. It's kind of that chicken and the egg. When do you take the leap and employ somebody so that you can be more effective? So would you have any tips or advice on who's trying to make that decision in their own business at the minute?
I think there are peculiarities in aviation, because you need key positions to be filled in order to get a license. You need to have a certain number of pilots on the books before the license will be issued. But clearly, those pilots won't be flying until you have a license. It's a catch-22. But I think it's all about project management, really. I think the very first airline I set up in Asia, there was a tendency just to jump into it and not have a strong project manager in charge of the team, not have clear timelines, not have the degree of budgetary control that we would have in this startup today. All of them are hard lessons to learn, but it's a matter of cash conservation. I think this is what it boils down to, and that applies to any business. That it's very easy to run out of your capital quickly. It's an obvious concern, an obvious danger, an obvious point. But I think it's one that's overlooked in many startup situations.
Yeah, and sorry,
yeah,
Andrew.
Sorry to complete the point. In which case, you have to go back to investors and shareholders, and that's never a good look when you're handing out the begging bowl again. So, fiscal discipline, I suppose, is what it boils down to.
Yeah, fiscal, but the fiscal discipline coming from the strategic planning that you must put in place first, because I think that's where a lot of people don't see the value in that.
Yeah, and I think there's also a point here where you got to transmit the strategic vision to the team effectively from day one. I think again, to me, that's a very obvious point, but there are many startups where that doesn't happen. I mean, people have got to understand why they're working in a particular fashion, maybe why they're on a part-time basis rather than full-time basis. They've got to understand the logic of where the company is going, where the startup is going. And I think there's got to be a clear understanding. Yeah, in the airline business, again, there should be an understanding at all levels of the company, from baggage loaders to pilots to head of marketing, whatever. There's got to be that unanimity around strategic goals. Easy to say, and of course, I think it's incredibly difficult to achieve. But it's not a one-off briefing; it's a continuous process. We a couple of the airlines I worked on, we actually had our own internal TV station, which sounds a bit over elaborate, but it was basically a screen that was visible in all the working areas, crew reporting zones, and the main offices, which just updated on where the airline was, what it was doing, new routes, new aircraft, all of that stuff. And I thought that was a very powerful tool for bringing the team together and making everybody feel aligned with the key corporate goals.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it. It speaks to me that, you have everybody moving in the same direction. But, again, I would come across so many people, and you say, have you got a vision statement? And they would have to go and look it up. Whereas you're advocating, like, everybody should be involved. Everybody should know what that is so they can be enrolled in it then. Yeah,
I mean, I know there's a tendency to think, well, that's MBA stuff and it doesn't apply to the world. But I think it is critical that you have clearly defined values, goals, objectives, and of course that you don't just put those on a shelf somewhere, but you communicate them very effectively. I think the other point about this is communication being two-way. Again, quite an obvious point, but in the airline context, what we tend to do is have, for example, crew feedback sessions. So on a regular basis, meet cabin crew, cockpit crew, and get their feedback from the front line, because there's a real danger in the airline sector that management in head office gets isolated from the guys that are working front line. Some of the best ideas on how to enhance service, on how to do simple things better, comes from those frontline guys who are flying the aircraft or working at the back of the aircraft, and being receptive to that feedback, but also having that feedback scheduled and run on a regular basis, I think is critical to the success of an airline project. And I'm sure that's something. Yeah, it goes back to the old Japanese concept of quality circles in an industrial production sense, and I think it's it can apply across the board really in the business sector.
Totally agree, and it's having the the open mindset to to be open to that feedback as well. But I think that is totally relevant. Doesn't matter whether it's 2 people in a business or 200 people or 2,000. So and it's interesting to hear you say this, not speaking from theory, but speaking from experience as well. So I'm interested. It's a really exciting project, and obviously being from Belfast, I'm excited to get these new connections. So what does the future look like beyond 2024? Where do you think Fly Atlantic will be in 5 years' time from there?
Well, the aim in 5 years is to be flying a fleet of 18 to 20 aircraft and serving about 35 to 40 destinations. Now, half of those would be across the Atlantic in Canada and the US, and the other half in continental Europe, the rest of the UK, going right the way down to countries like Egypt, Lebanon, Cyprus, Israel. By that stage, we should be carrying around 4 million passengers a year. But I think the you know, those are numbers. I think the key point about this is by 2028, 29, 2030, we would want to see Belfast established and recognised as one of the important aviation hubs in Europe. Not the biggest, of course. I mean, we're not contemplating something on the scale of a Frankfurt or Heathrow, but certainly a significant player in that space, and a place that people associate with transit to and from North America. We achieved that in Iceland at WOW Air. WOW Air was actually quite a short-lived project, and part of the reason was because it was based in Iceland, which was a ferociously expensive location to run an airline in. But people began to associate Reykjavik, Keflavik as a transit point to North America. We want to establish that for Belfast. But there's one other important point here, Scott. We also want to do a more effective job of promoting Northern Ireland as an inbound tourist destination, because I think, having spent a lot of time there now, the Northern Ireland has a huge range of attractions, but you have to feel it's somewhat neglected in a way, and it's not the primary focus for people coming in from North America to this part of the world. So we definitely want to put that right. We want to showcase what's happening in Northern Ireland and what Northern Ireland has to offer, and get a much larger slice of the tourist pie, particularly out of the US.
Yeah, and so there's a bit of mutual benefit between Northern Ireland does better and the airline does better. But what, just to pick up on your last point there, what was interesting is just how it's not the granular level, but you're quite clear where you want to be by 2030, how you're going to do it, and also where you fit in the market. You're not trying to deal with everybody. You're quite clear on that.
We're very clear about the market segment. But just to go back on that point about what's good for flight landing is good for Northern Ireland. I mean, that's I suppose it sounds a little simplistic, but you look at the way major aviation hubs have developed around the world. You look at Emirates and Dubai. You look at, from my experience, Cathay Pacific and Hong Kong, Singapore Airlines in Singapore. A powerful, successful, well-known, well-respected airline has a tremendous impact on the local economy and also on the image of that country or that region. So we're looking to do something similar in the Northern Ireland context. To get to that point, I think it's going to revolve very much around value for money. People talk about low fares, and it's important to be competitive and to pitch your fares at an attractive level. But you really need to develop and deliver value for money, that proposition, because it's no good offering the lowest fares in the world if your planes don't leave on time, if they're dirty, if flights are cancelled willy-nilly. I think what passengers are looking for would be a low fare or a competitive fare, but also a reliable, safe operation, and an operation that generally delivers on-time performance. And also, quite importantly, a good airport experience as part of the mix. People tend to overlook that, but when you think about it, it's the transit airport that shapes perceptions as well. Yeah. So that is something that Fly Atlantic can do on its own. We need the wholehearted support of Belfast International, and we need their investment in the project alongside our own investment.
Well, Andrew, we've covered a lot of stuff today, vision and mission and culture and market segmentation and everything. And I really I have so many more questions. I really enjoyed, hearing from your experience. So look, thank you so much for taking the time out to get involved today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Scott, and look forward to talking again.
Yeah, be great. Thank you.